What's going on, everybody? Right now I am in Havana, Cuba, and today I want to share with you 7 essential things to know before planning a trip here to Cuba. So to start off, I think that one of the most important things to know about traveling in Cuba is that internet access is very unreliable, and it's not really a place I would recommend for travelers who have to work while they're traveling or who like to upload a lot of videos to social media, because it's not going to be very easy. In Cuba, it's still not very common to have internet access in your home or in Airbnbs, and even in some hotels, especially outside of Havana, the capital city, you're not really going to find a good internet connection. So I would definitely recommend doing a lot of research beforehand to know about if you have Wi-Fi wherever you're going to be staying. And even if you do find a place that says they have good Wi-Fi, I would still be a little bit cautious going into that, because in Cuba there's only one internet provider and it's run by the government. So in order to get online at all in the entire country, you have to have a government internet passcode and ID that you sign up for at the airport or at one of the stores, or you have to borrow someone else's internet access. So I arrived at my Airbnb that said they had free internet, and I had to get online using her personal account and personal passcode, but we really couldn't be using it at the same time. So it was very unreliable and hard to get online and do things. Just know that going in, especially if you're leaving Havana and going out to other more remote parts of Cuba, you're basically going to be traveling off grid. So know that going in. And moving on to a second thing I think is essential to know before any trip to Cuba, which is the fact that many basic toiletry items and over-the-counter medications, basically anything you'd find in a pharmacy in your home country, might not be readily available on the island. I'm thinking of personal care items such as toothbrushes and toothpaste, maybe shampoos and conditioners, toilet paper. Even in public restrooms in Cuba, a lot of times toilet paper isn't there, so you have to bring your own. And certain things like ibuprofen or Pepto-Bismol if you get sick. All of that is not going to be easy to find, so I'd basically recommend packing a toiletry bag or a pharmacy bag to bring with you, and you'll be grateful for it if you ever need anything. Sadly, one of the main reasons behind this poor internet connection and a lack of a lot of these goods is because of the US-Cuba relations and the trade embargoes between the two countries, and a lot of this comes back and hurts the Cuban people. And speaking of politics and political relationships, the third point I want to make is understanding your Cuban visa and how to get into the country, especially if you're an American. There's an extra step you need to take and be aware of before planning a trip. Now, some of you watching this video might already know about the Cuban visa situation, and if you do, feel free to skip ahead to the other parts of the video. But if not, basically everyone who's traveling to Cuba needs to have a visa card. So if you're coming from a country that's not in the US, this card is going to be green, and you always have to get it before you arrive. There's no visa on arrival, and basically you'll be good to go if you get this card, fill it out, and bring it with you. They'll let you into the country. But if you're coming from the US to Cuba, there's a different story. You have to get a pink card. Now, as a non-American citizen, you can get this card and not have to do any other steps. You just fly there with the pink card, good to go. But as an American citizen, you need to check a box that is specifically not for tourism. You need to let the airline know you're traveling to Cuba for certain other reasons like work, studying, or the main one that a lot of people use is support for the Cuban people. So what I did is I reached out to Cuban Visa Services, told them I was traveling to Cuba as a support for the Cuban people, and they sent me my pink card. I filled it out and I was good to go. But the most important thing you need to know is that anyone in Cuba has to keep this card on them for the duration of their trip, because you have to give it back on your exit. So if you get into the country, throw out your card, your Visa card, then you're out of luck, because in order to leave the country and get back on your plane, you need the card with you. So remember that and don't lose it during your stay. Now, after a very long and boring explanation of the visa situation, I'm moving on to point number 4, which has to do with scams to look out for while visiting Cuba. So something that you need to look out for while traveling here, especially if you're in Havana, is what a lot of people refer to as the slow hustle. Now, I think it's important to preface this by saying that I did meet some genuinely great Cuban people. Not everyone on the streets is trying to pull a scam on you. There are some great, friendly souls out there, but this particular scam was attempted on me quite a few times, so I want to share it, make sure it doesn't happen to you in the future. But the whole idea of the slow hustle or the cigar scam is trying to get tourists to buy cigars that are either unauthentic or fake, or they're super overpriced. And how it would work is that someone would come up to me, normally in English, and seem like they were just looking for a genuine conversation. They'd be super friendly, asking me where I'm from, asking how I've enjoyed my time in Cuba, and just things about my trip. And slowly during your conversation, or if you're walking together, they'll kind of slip the idea of cigars into your head, ask you if you tried to smoke a Cuban cigar yet while you were here, or asking you if you bought them to bring home to your family yet. And if you say no, then they really jump on you and start pushing the idea, saying there's a big local sale for either just this week or just today only. You can get a ton of cigars for a really good price for cheap, and you can't pass up this deal. They'll try and put pressure on you, and they'll start walking with you towards their friend or family member who sells them. If you keep going along at this point, then they're going to quote you these high prices. They'll show you this like authentic box, and they'll make you smell the cigars, see how great they are. And then they'll say, oh, this is going to be $250, $300 US for this whole box. Amazing souvenir for all of your family. These are great Cuban cigars, but genuinely, they're probably fake or way overpriced. So in the future, if you do go to Cuba, to avoid this scam, anytime anyone asks you about cigars, you can say you either already bought them or you're not interested, and then they might leave you alone if they're only looking to scam you for money. And while we're on the topic of money, that transitions me to my fifth point, which is how to change money effectively when traveling to Cuba. Currency and currency exchange in Cuba can definitely be one of the biggest headaches about traveling here. And one of the biggest problems is that a lot of times foreign credit cards, foreign bank cards might not work in the country, especially if you're an American. So I highly recommend trying to estimate the total cost of your trip in Cuba and maybe bring as much money as you can on your person so that you don't have to go to the bank regularly, because it's definitely going to be more of a challenge than it would be in other countries. And there are about 3 different ways you can exchange money when you're in Cuba, and some of them are better than others, but US dollars, euros, pounds, they're all highly sought after in the country. So if you're coming here with those types of currencies, you can definitely get a good exchange rate. The first option is to go to the airport and exchange it there. That is more an official rate, and it's actually much lower. So if you give $1 US, €1, you're going to get less Cuban pesos than you would going through a person on the street or going through your local host. So I highly recommend option 2, which is to contact your host before you come. Tell them you're going to bring this much in a foreign currency, and if they want the US dollars or the euros, which they definitely will, it's stronger, then they will be willing to exchange with you at a really good rate. Hopefully, that's what happened with me. I brought like $100 US with me, and she exchanged for a very good rate to Cuban pesos, and it was super helpful. I felt like I had a lot more money than I would have if I went to the airport. And the third way, which is definitely more risky, is there's a lot of people on the street who are willing to change as well. People always saying that they'll change money with you, shouting cambio, cambio, and changing currencies. But these people might not be as trustworthy, so you want to make sure you trust who you're talking to and exchanging money with. But one final note about the money situation is that sometimes for services like tours or taxi rides, they actually are going to request that you pay them in foreign currency like USD or euros. So you want to keep Cuban pesos on you, but also your foreign currency to pay for certain services here and there. And now moving on to point number 6, which is kind of something I touched on a little bit earlier, but it's the fact that outside of Havana, Cuba gets very remote very quickly, and it can be a difficult place to travel in if you're not prepared, you don't speak Spanish, and you don't really know exactly where you're going. Especially without a good internet connection, and as you get farther and farther outside the main cities, you're probably going to have to be off-grid. It's going to be difficult to kind of figure out Google Maps, travel around with the bus system, and understand everything. So you're going to want to either have a local driver or someone take you to certain places so you can get around more easily rather than being confused and getting lost out in the countryside. But I don't want that to deter you from trying to leave the main areas. There's definitely some really cool places to see outside of the capital. Going to Vinales Valley, going to Veradero, going to Trinidad. There's so many places to see and explore, but it might be a little bit more difficult. So maybe go using a tour or really research the bus schedule and system so you can get around easily and not get lost out in the middle of nowhere. And finally, my last point, point number 7, is that Cuba is not a very great place to travel if you have a lot of dietary restrictions. So if you have to eat gluten-free or if you're a vegan, it can definitely be a bit of a struggle, and that's for 2 reasons. One, there aren't many huge supermarkets where you can go and find a ton of options. Everything's in pretty local markets or very small stores. So maybe if you speak some Spanish, you can go buy some fruits and vegetables at the local market, or in these stores, maybe you'll find some options, but overall, it's not very good for finding a variety. And second, typical Cuban food definitely isn't great for dietary restrictions. A lot of the meals come with bread, sandwiches, pastas, pizzas. It's pretty heavy stuff, and it often comes with meat as well. So you're going to be eating a lot of bread and a lot of meat, and that can be problematic for people who have these restrictions. So I'd highly recommend bringing stuff with you like granola bars and other breakfast foods if you can in your luggage when you come, because you might not have tons of options while you're here. All right, everyone, so that is going to be it. Those are 7 things I think are essential to know before anyone takes a trip to Cuba here in 2023. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you on the next one.